we are going to go back to the year after the lockout. We talked about this a bit yesterday. The Ryan Kesler offer sheet. A couple of days before training camp begins, the Flyers send a 1-year, $1.9 million offer sheet to restricted free agent Ryan Kesler in Vancouver. They match. He never becomes a Flyer. But what if he had been? And I was just trying to go back in time, Charlie, and see like how it may change their roster construction a little bit. So they signed Kesler to the offer sheet on September 12th, 2006. It was matched later that week. They already had Richards and Carter coming off of rookie seasons. Right. And they drafted Claude Giroux a few months prior. Now, of course, he's a right wing at the time. Didn't realize he was going to become one of the best centers in the game until years later. But they'd have Richards, Carter, and Kesler down the middle coming off of the, kind of going into that bad year. Everything happens. Okay, we need to make the big splash. Do you think, first of all, they still sign Danny Briere? Because they'd still probably suck in 2006-07.
Yes.
Like, Kesler didn't break out till, 08. Do you think they still go get Danny Briere?
I do. I absolutely do, because I think the key there is Kesler didn't break out that year. So, it would have been huge. And it's a fascinating question, because I do think it probably does change dramatically, because Kesler was a really good player in his prime. We're talking about a Selke guy. We're talking about a Selke winner who was, basically, totally different players in terms of style. Ryan Kesler at his peak was an incredible skater, and Sean Couturier is not, but he was basically Sean Couturier in his peak. Like, that was it was prime age Ryan Kesler. Was Sean Couturier if Sean Couturier built his game around speed and being a total piece of shit rather than smarts and just like being able to read the play perfectly every single time. Like, they were different players, but the results fairly similar in terms of points and two-way. But I do think that the Flyers, even if they get Ryan Kesler that year, they still stink in 2006, 2007, because Kesler didn't start to become Ryan Kesler until 2007, 2008. He didn't really become Ryan Kesler for like another couple years, but that was the first year where he was getting 19 minutes a night. And that would have been the year when the Flyers got back to being the Flyers. They got to the conference final against the Penguins. So I still think they go out and make a big splash, because they're the Flyers. Holmgren's the GM. He goes out, he gets Briere, he gets Tiemann in, he gets Hartnell. They go for it. So I think that still happens. The fascinating question to me is, if that still happens and they still make the quick turnaround under Holmgren in 2007, 2008, but you add Ryan Kesler to those teams, those late 2000s, early 2010 teams, is that enough to get them a cup during those years? Because Kesler was real, real good.
That's his prime is 07, 08 through 11, 12. That was the prime of those teams. Imagine having the Selke winner on those teams too with those guys. And it also creates say Claude Giroux comes up, maybe they trade him for help elsewhere, a goalie or something. He's part of a package like that, or maybe he sticks at wing and suddenly we have this incredible dynamic 3-line offense of just all these star centers down the middle. I think it's probably enough, especially as we'll get to later. I don't know, man, that 2012 team with Kesler and Shea Weber, that's a good team right there.
Pretty good team.
12-13 team. That's a damn good team. It turns out the Flyers stunk, though. But I the what ifs that can shoot off of this are interesting to me. He starts to slow down a little, but he'd still be considered in his prime and probably signed long term if the Flyers do stay on the same path, but by trading Richards and Carter. So say they still make those trades with Ryan Kesler here. Do they draft their current captain, Sean Couturier, at 7? You have Kesler, who is, as you just said, Couturier. He wins a Selke a couple years before this. He's in the mix for it all these years. Dougie Hamilton goes 8th. Maybe they're like, fuck it, let's go defense. We already have Giroux and we already have Kesler. Let's go defense.
So, honestly, maybe. They might not go Couturier. I remember with Couturier, and I learned about this years ago. I think it was Bill Meltzer who told me. Basically, they didn't even interview Couturier before that draft because they didn't think, number one, they didn't know they were going to have the pick. until a little bit before the draft. And then number 2, they never thought Couturier was going to slip to 8. That wasn't even a guy they were once they figured like, oh, we might trade Carter and Richards, we might get a high pick. He wasn't even a guy where they're like, there's no chance he slips to 8. Like he was viewed to be a top 5 pick. They basically picked Couturier because it was like, well, we need a center. We just traded Carter and Richards, and this guy shouldn't be here. So I guess we're taking him. What I will say that I've heard though is that if they didn't take Couturier, I don't think Hamilton was going to be the pick. I think they liked Jonas Brodin better than Dougie. And Brodin's good. Like he's not as good as Dougie, but he's good, and he certainly would have helped that defense. But I don't think it was going to be Dougie.
It was. I think he went 9th. Brodin. I looked at
Brodin went 10. Dougie went 9, Brodin went 10. I think and this is just based on like scuttlebutt that I've heard, just like doing like what if conversations in the press box. I think I've heard that they like Brodin more than Dougie.
And it was, I think 5 of the 6 picks after Coots were defensemen. So it's just like we have our centers. Dougie's the biggest name, but yeah, Brodin's there. There's a couple other guys. Like I bet you our current captain ain't here. Like that might be the biggest ripple effect of this. Like I wondered if the GM isn't here, but like, they still stink. They have to make the splash.
Yeah.
I think they get Danny. Drury. Like it was either Drury or Briere, and they clearly preferred Briere, and they went out and got him. And like, I think all that still happens, but I think the biggest ripple effect would be Couturier. And that's real interesting because Coots is still here, and now he's the freaking captain, as we just went through.
Yeah.
Like, that's, I think, the biggest what if, but so many things could shoot off of that. Like you said, man, the prime of Ryan Kesler was the prime of those teams. God damn it. Imagine if we had him in our middle 6, just being that asshole. Although with him and Mike Richards, Jesus Christ, like if you thought we had a lot of suspensions in 08 without him, like that would have been a lot of fun too. We would absolutely be the villains if we had Richards and Ryan Kesler on those teams. That would have been a ton of fun.
We all silly like the mayor.